Well, welcome to Coffee with Vern, a time where we have intentional conversations about the gospel and we desire to talk about theological truth. Thanks for joining us. We hope you can learn and grow and be fed through this.
Boker Tov, everyone. Good morning.
Breakfast edition. What are you eating?
Golly, dude. I sound like a bullfrog. I really sound horrible through these today. I'm eating Pop-Tarts.
You're eating Pop-Tarts. It's breakfast edition. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking chocolate milk.
Yeah. Pop-Tarts
and
chocolate milk.
The Puritan Perkins brew. We got it all going on. I am my grandfather made over. I think I've told you this story. Probably. Yeah. Every day at breakfast, he had a cup of orange juice, a cup of coffee, a cup of water, and then he had cereal, and he always drank the milk after he ate his cereal. And every day, same 4 different substances to drink. I'm like, Paul, that's a lot.
That's a lot of liquid in the beginning.
No wonder you're having to pee so much in the morning.
Yeah.
So, man, I can't even watch the news. I'm like, yeah, I wonder why.
Stop drinking the liquids.
Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time of the day you decide to listen to us bullfrog into the microphones.
Yeah.
Man.
Thank you, Georgia weather.
Yeah.
Decided to dip down into the 50s.
Dude, it is tearing me to pieces because of this weekend at the wedding I was at. It got pretty cool in the evening. And then we ran up Harris Mountain. That's a story. And it was pretty cool that morning. So I just can't win when it comes to my throat these days and sinuses. But you know what? It's okay. As long as all of our listeners can deal with the bullfrog vibrating in their headphones or whatever they use, I'm sorry. But I am excited about this episode. I am. I might not sound like it or look like it, but I actually am.
Yeah. Last week we got to talk about our favorite people.
Yeah.
And that was easy.
That's always
Maybe
easy.
Too easy.
It's always easy.
Yeah. So this week we got to talk about
these
2 guys who took some effort.
These 2 guys are they're different.
They're so different.
I'm different. Yes, they are different. That's a song, by the way. But they are very different. I don't even know how to summarize. I couldn't put into words Flavel exactly like with one word. I couldn't describe him.
I have a title for him.
You do?
Everybody has a title. Bunyan didn't have a title, but I think we called him the layman.
We called him the layman Puritan. Yeah.
So Flavel, to me,
what you think?
He is the Puritan Robin Hood.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to go back and read some more of him, and I'll see it now that you say that even more.
Yeah.
Whereas Edwards was definitely, he has a nickname. Yes. Greatest American Theologian.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's the light.
Hello, Lord. Good morning. Dude, if you watch these episodes, this light is on and off, on and off. So, but yeah, he was greatest American theologian.
He was
/ philosopher.
Man, his stuff is wordy.
Have you ever read any of his
sermons and books?
They're insane.
The titles, it's a paragraph.
Yeah, he was notorious for that. And if you look through his works, like you'll be like, are they describing the sermon or is this the sermon title?
Yeah, and like his
book, content.
The thing with Edwards too, we'll get all into that in a minute. But with Edwards too, I feel like every time he got angry and wanted to charge back at somebody, he just wrote a book about it.
Or he wrote a sermon or a book.
Sermon or a book. Like, oh yeah. Well, wait till next week when I have a sermon.
Oh, you want this smoke? Well, I'm going to write a sermon about it Sunday. Come back, sit down right there. Dude, no, can you imagine if that's how we still operated today?
Shoot.
Man, you just fired me up. I'm going to write a sermon just about that.
Like, oh no, I made James mad. Can't come to church next Sunday. The sermon's going to be about us.
Wednesday night, he's going off. Allison, we're not going tonight. Yep. That's hilarious. Yeah. But it's so true.
Yeah.
And I mean, we saw that with John Knox a little bit too.
Oh my goodness.
If not more.
Yeah.
If not more.
He was very passive aggressive though. John Edwards was like very biblical. Yeah. John Knox was like, no, I'm just going to be very kind of rude to you.
John Knox like,
you're just going to have to deal with it.
You're just straight junk.
Yeah.
And then Jonathan Edwards was definitely the Bible tells us that we are depraved, and so therefore, brethren, you are. It's so true, though. It's so true, and so that's good stuff, man. I'm telling you, I'm excited about this episode. Flavel, let me talk a little bit. Each week, I've been bringing some different works in here, so that if you're a bookworm, you want to check some of this stuff out, go for it. The Jonathan Edwards ones are really affordable. And I highly recommend them if you catch on, you like Jonathan Edwards, because you can buy his books, but they're really short. And so you can spend a lot of money on just little ones. you can get these usually on sale, especially at Christmas time. But Jonathan Edwards' works, they're in 2 volumes, and they're both right here. And I started reading through one of those sermons. And I will confess, if you have a hard time reading, these are squinters, man. You got to squint. But it's just very wordy. It's good, but it's wordy, you know?
Yes.
And then Flavel, I actually just got those right before COVID hit.
Both of those volume sets are a very nice shade of brown.
Yeah, they are a very nice shade of brown.
Makes me wonder why.
I have no idea. These are old. The Flavel ones are older. Yeah. These are new. The new Flavel ones, I think, are red, but they're both pretty affordable. The Flavel ones, I mean, you know, the thing I like about Brainard Truth, their publishing stuff, is you can look at the front and it shows all their contents. And the thing I do like about Flavel compared to like John Owen's is there's a lot of the brokenness into each volume is much more strategic, I think.
Yeah.
Like you have in volume 1, the life of John Flavel. And so, but those are some good stuff. And, you know, I like to set out books to promote because I want to encourage people to read and study. And it's amazing what you can learn from these gold mines. And so we've got a good episode to talk about. One other book that I'm going to refer to, and this was a Lifeway Going Out of Business pickup. But John Piper, he's written a lot of these. They're called servants, or no, the Swans Are Silent. Excuse me. It's the Swans Are Silent. I have a couple of them in our student library for the kids bar if you ever want to borrow one. But they made a whole compiled book of all the miniature books that he wrote of it. And this is really good. It has a lot of stuff on the Puritans, actually John Owen and all. And so we're going to refer to that a little bit today because it's modern English.
Speaking of John Owen, we have 3 T-shirts left.
Only 3 though. 2
larges and 1 medium.
1 medium and 2 larges.
That's right. So if you
guys
want
it
that,
quick.
Yeah,
we got 3, and man, those shirts have been quality.
Oh man, I know.
We got good stuff
now. Look,
coming.
Quick sidebar story.
Sidebar.
Okay, so I wear all these shirts out, and they have been great conversation starters. Okay, especially the Reagan T-shirt. Great conversation starters. This one has been a little bit of a harder conversation. It starts them because the quote is "Be killing sin, or sin will be killing you." You know, it's something we very much agree with. In Publix, was it yesterday or the day before? The checkout lady saw it and she read it and she was like, "Yeah, Puritans were hardcore." And I said, "Yeah, some of them were." And she instantly goes to the Salem witch trials.
Oh my Lord.
So there's people behind me, and this is the 10 items or less line. So people are already expecting like this to go quick. And so I'm spending time in the 10 items or less line trying to explain to her that's not where this is going. I don't really consider those people the kind of Puritans that we're studying, trying to explain what we were doing.
I would debate that those were the crazy pilgrims.
But see, that's yes. And see, I think people forget that there's crazy on and everything.
Well, and there's a difference
in
the Pilgrims and Puritans too.
And absolutely. But she was like, they would have considered me a witch because I'm left-handed and I talk to my cat. And I'm like, we're all different. God made us all unique. Like I was doing all kinds of stuff. And I'm like,
I'm a minister of the gospel and I talk to my miniature dots.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Reformation shirt, all that stuff, easy conversation starters. They just kind of eased into it. This one, I was like, oh man, when I wear this shirt out in public, I got to be prepared.
You got to have your junk together.
I got to have my junk together.
Well, the good news is I've only worn mine in the church, so stay tuned.
Yeah, me too until that day.
Usually,
so it was Sunday because Allison had a craving and she wanted a Publix sub.
You got a pregnant wife.
So I had worn it at church and I was like, wow.
Yeah, you did.
So
this man is another sidebar before we get into it, because today's will probably be a little bit shorter since we don't, these aren't our faves.
Yeah.
I never get that experience. You and my mom always somebody be like, man, what's Coffee with Vern? Or, hey, what's the Reformers? What's the Reformation? And I'll wear these shirts and I never get nothing. But the time I wear Escape Outdoors shirts, you know what I get? Oh, you work over there? I'm like, man, no. But I'm like, hey,
you
Ryan.
spend enough time over there. You should get
Ryan,
paid
you need
for
a part-time employee for, stocking shelves on me, man. But Always Escape Outdoors.
Just
And
get paid
then
in
my metal
merch.
band t-shirts.
Well, yeah.
Those are my favorite conversations. They're like, man, you listen to that? I'm like, yeah, you? And it's one of two extremes. I either get, yeah, man, I love that band. Or I get, man, that's that demonic stuff. I'm like,
That's the devil.
what? Just because it's angry, sweaty men screaming in a microphone doesn't mean it's the devil's music. Come back at me, bro. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? Shall we? Well, we're gonna today's episode. What was last week? I said
Do blessed.
Do blessed.
In today's episode, we do blessed.
Oh my gosh, I'm struggling. In
Drink your chocolate
today's
milk.
episode, yeah, maybe it's the chocolate milk. We're gonna kind of feed off each other, so we're not gonna take one each.
Tag team.
But we got John Flavel, and
Yes.
so we'll start with Flavel, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
This man is highly debated when he was born, anywhere from 1627 to 1630.
Right. So I said 1628 because that's when John Bunyan was born. So I was like, well, let's just have them. Let's have them be the same
Let's
age.
have them be friends, even though they didn't know each other. That makes sense. Yeah,
They're birthday buddies.
they are. So they're in
We
that
have no
same
idea.
region. But what's crazy is they all were being. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. I got to get to that in a minute. Save the row. But 1627, 1630. He dies in 1691. Right. But I made sure to note that he went into the ministry 1650. So anywhere in his 20s is what we can gather from that. He started ministry.
Yeah. And that was after the English Civil War. So he grew up
Yeah.
in the same, if you guys remember, John Bunyan, John Owen, they all lived through this very tumultuous time in England. English Civil War. What's that look?
Tumultuous. I am a proud brother. I don't even know what that word means, but wow, it was one of those that soothed my ear.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
glad you
Sorry.
enjoyed that.
They lived through this tumultuous time.
Yeah, the English Civil War, the split between the Church of England and which was the monarchy and Parliament, who was Puritan. And so Flavel's going through the same exact thing that the two guys last week went through.
Same exact time period.
Yeah.
What's cool about John Flavel is his father was a minister.
Yes.
I thought that was pretty cool. And it's hilarious how they both got ejected out of the pulpit
For the same
thing.
But his father died in prison.
Yeah, so his father died in 1665 of
Yeah.
plague while in prison.
While in prison.
But what was the reason he was in prison? Unconformity.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't know what that means, essentially that meant like they're not conforming to what the standard was.
Well, see, once the protectorate, the time of the protectorate was over, I think it was it 10 years or something like that? I'm not sure. Anyway, the Parliament, Oliver Cromwell died.
Yes.
The Parliament was scared of the split of England. They asked Charles II to come back and form a monarchy again. Charles II, Church of England guy,
Yeah.
enacted the Act of Uniformity.
Yes.
Basically, every minister who was ordained, which he and his father, Flavel and his father, were both
Right.
ordained ministers, they had to follow the Book of Common Prayer, among other things, and they
Yeah.
had to adopt the liturgy of the Church of England, which of
meant
course they
their
were not.
bylaws and
Yeah,
everything.
which they were not going to do.
And liturgy, if you don't know what that means, that's referring to their form of worship.
Right.
So they're essentially their worship service. They had to literally conform
It had
to
to
what
look-
the Church of
yes.
England was.
Exactly.
And so that's why unconformity is
Yeah.
referring to that.
Yeah. And so it was about 2,000 ministers that were ejected immediately.
I love that word ejected.
Yeah.
And I have this
It's a
picture
very
of them
forced-
standing at the pulpit and then just the
Launching.
floor.
Yeah.
See it, bro.
Well, I mean, it's true, right? It's a very forceful thing. This is their congregation. They don't want to leave their flock. And then church and state authority says,
Peace,
bye. You got to go.
Yeah, and that, man, that's a huge thing I've noticed with the Puritans is their love for their flock.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them, like Edwards traveled a lot. He was moving like crazy. But there was this constant love for, you know what, this is the flock that the Lord has called me to in this moment.
Yeah.
And there was this immense desire to pour into their direct flock. Man, we could learn a lot from that. Yeah, and Flavel, another thing we want to make sure you understand too about the Puritans was they suffered immensely.
Yeah.
You know, that one of the greatest things that we can learn from the Puritans is how to suffer well. And I think I've said that. But, I mean, Flavel, he married 4 different women, not because he got tired. No, it's because
died.
3 of them passed away.
Yeah. His first
First one died while giving birth to his child, and the child died.
Yeah, so
I mean,
sad.
you think about the weight of that.
Yeah.
And so then Joel Beakey says he went on a year sabbatical or time away, and then he remarried. And I'm not sure how long that next marriage was, but 3 of his wives passed away.
Yeah.
And then the 4th one outlived him.
That's right.
But just immense suffering. I mean, I can't imagine.
Well, he was ejected. And so he started meeting, and this is where the Robin Hood of the Puritans title comes in.
Dude, my man was
So he
sneaky.
started meeting in secret in different places. So then they enacted the 5 Mile Act. Did you read anything about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's interesting.
5 Mile Act, it wasn't enough to eject them from their churches. Now they couldn't live within 5 miles of the churches they had ministered.
Trying to make it to where they wouldn't travel.
Right.
Because think about it. You think they got cars? No.
Well, so they made it to where like you couldn't meet with your congregation in your home secretly.
Right.
And so he had to move, but his congregation still met. He would meet he's Robin Hood. He would meet in the woods
They
at
met in
midnight.
the woods at midnight. Yeah.
And the best story is when
I've got it. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, go for it.
I know exactly where you're going. Go ahead. Say it.
When
I'm
the
pulling it up.
authorities found them in the woods and they tried to disperse the congregation, some of the members were arrested. Some of the members grabbed him, took him away to a different part of the woods, and he kept preaching.
You saved me the best part.
Go for it.
I thought this is hilarious. Flavel was ejected in 1662. On occasion, he would preach for them in the woods, especially on days of fasting and humiliation, which they didn't explain a lot about that. But once he even disguised himself as a woman on horseback in order to reach a secret meeting.
But see, that's not my favorite one. My favorite one is when he was being pursued on horseback, and he decides to jump that horse off a cliff into the ocean.
And he managed to escape.
In a rocky part.
That's right.
So basically, my man jumps off a cliff with the horse. He's like, forget the horse. So he swims to a rocky area, hides behind some rocks until the authorities are like, well, he's probably dead. And then he gets out.
We're not making this stuff up.
No.
Like somebody needs to make a movie after this man.
Yeah. And then he would also preach from a place, I think it was called Salston Rock.
It was, yep.
And he would preach there until the tide came in because it would cover the rock. And then he would preach from a boat. And the congregations would listen from a boat.
What just amazes me about these stories, though, is the desire.
Yeah.
I mean, that is as funny as it is, too.
Yeah.
Look at the call on his life.
I know, it's crazy.
I mean, my man was like, you know what? You want to say I'm an unconformist? I am. Watch me ride this horse into the ocean.
Well, see, what's funny about that is a few years later in 1672, Charles II issued a declaration of indulgence. These people, they have no clue what they want. And so he's like, okay, I'm fine with you guys. If you want to come back and publicly preach, that's fine. That's fine. So he comes back to his hometown and he starts preaching for a little bit in Dartmouth. And then all of a sudden, a year later, they're like, oh, just kidding. We don't want you to preach publicly anymore. We're going to rescind that indulgence. And so Flavel's like, okay, I'm used to preaching in secrecy. I'll just go back to that.
We've been doing this the whole time.
He's like, no biggie. No skin off my back.
There's a lot we can learn from that. Huge application.
Yes, absolutely.
The church is not a building.
No.
Huge application. And so I thought my favorite one, your favorite one's the horseback. My favorite one's my man dressed up like a woman. He's like, you know what? You don't want to recognize me?
It's
Bro,
like
I'll fix that real quick.
It's like the Sherlock Holmes movie, the second one, where he has all those disguises when he's following that lady. That's what it made me think of. Or actually like the Robin Hood cartoon.
I was going to say the Robin Hood. I think about Robin Hood cartoons.
Well, there you go. See, there you go. Yeah.
What a dude.
He lived through, and then another indulgence in 1687. And then the glorious revolution of England happened in 1688, where James II fled to France. Parliament finally took over. But by this time, he was old and weary. His quote was, "We have long borne the burden and heat of the day. We are veteran soldiers almost worn out."
Yeah. I mean, there's a quote he ends his life on too that will parallel to that.
Yeah.
Something I thought was amazing towards the end of his life was he was just so determined to love the people of Dartmouth. That's where he was ordained. That's where he's called to ministry. And then that's where this heart was. 1684. So right prior to actually 7 years before he passes, he was burned by a mob. And Flavel's response was
his effigy was burned.
Yeah, just to pray.
That was after he got back from New York.
Yep.
And where he was almost arrested there.
I mean, my man was
not New York. Did I say New York? I meant London.
My man was always
New York was John Edwards.
Yeah. We're gonna get to the American guy.
So he went to London. He was almost arrested there.
Yep. And his response to them in this is, "Oh, that there were not a prayerless family in this town."
Yeah. Crazy.
You see the love of a pastor for his people. But Flavel died in 1691 of a massive stroke.
Massive stroke.
While this is the even funnier part. While he was going to preach for a friend.
Yeah.
He was with a friend to preach at this friend's, I guess, church or congregation. And Flavel's final words were, "I know that it will be well with me."
Yes.
All I can think of is, it is well.
Yep.
I mean, a life well lived. Yeah. Flavel. Oh, Flavel.
Yeah, that dude.
I'm looking forward to diving into some of his stuff. I'll tell you, man, I got a lot that I want to read when it comes to these Puritans because there's just so much.
Yeah.
So much. But then, last of today, but not least, Mr. Edwards.
He was a hard man, too.
One of the most well-known Puritans and one of the most debated if he should be even considered a Puritan.
Yeah, this one says they consider him the last Puritan.
Which, that is a huge debate, too.
Well, because we are going to be going over
what others say is the last Puritan. Yeah,
very
last
recent Martin Lloyd-Jones.
Yep. And so I'm looking forward to that next week. But Edwards had his own interesting life. He was born in October 5th, Anna's birthday, in 1703.
Yes. So we're now a century later.
Yeah. So we have picked up some time and we're in America. Right. This is right prior to the American Revolution, come in the late 1700s. So pilgrims have come, Puritans have settled. Jonathan Edwards' family is living and dwelling in Connecticut. All right, so he's born in Connecticut. He is the son of 11 children. Yeah.
What, is that like a thing? Like
I don't know. What's the symbolism of the number 11?
I don't know.
I can't think of any symbolic nature of the number in scriptures. I know 12.
Yeah.
But
I have no idea.
Interesting, right? Very interesting. I think my grandma was one of 11 too, if I remember.
That's crazy.
Wow.
That is a full quiver.
Brother. I think about if I can't, no, I just can't. His father was, so something cool about Edwards is he was extremely intellectual.
Yes.
Extremely.
Yes.
I'm stupid smart.
His dad was a minister and his wife's, or his mother's father.
Yeah, so his grandfather
maternal grandfather
and his
was a minister
father
as
were
well.
both in ministry. So he was raised in it just like John Flavel.
Yeah, which keep that in mind because that's an interesting point that I want to bring up in a minute, that he was brought up in a Christian home.
Hold on to it.
Yeah.
But his father was also very smart. So that kind of ran in the family. And his father was a well-known preacher in the area. At age 13, my man went to college.
And what college was it?
It was Cambridge, right? No.
It was
idiot, James.
Connecticut.
It
wasn't called Yale yet.
It wasn't called Yale.
It was called Connecticut's Collegiate School.
That's right.
But after 1718, it was known as Yale.
And he didn't want to go to Harvard.
No.
Did you read that?
Yes.
I thought that was significant because of some of what they were teaching at that time.
Yeah. Which, interesting sidebar we were talking about beforehand.
Yeah.
All these Ivy League schools founded as Christian.
Yeah, solid
colleges,
Christian schools is what they were founded on.
Yeah.
Puritans founded most of them.
Whatever they are now, it's not what they were when they started.
That no more.
Yeah.
But he went off to college at the age of 13.
Yeah.
And in 1721 is when he actually converted.
Yes, that's my thing. Okay, so he graduated when he was 17. He finished with a Bachelor's of Art in 1720. After he was raised in a Christian home with two minister patriarchs, basically.
Yes.
Okay. And his father was his teacher because a lot of ministers back then were also the teachers of the grammar schools.
That's right.
So he grew up in it. And his courses of study, biblical languages, logic, and natural philosophy, he graduated. He wasn't converted until after all that. Yep. That's what's crazy.
It says a lot about the working of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
It says about his timing is perfect, you know?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't raise the child up.
No.
And it means all
it
the
means
more.
you don't get discouraged.
That's right.
Either.
Yeah, huge application to parents and even, you know, like my students who are working with their one. Remember that you can't save them.
Yeah.
You're just the vessel that the Lord has called.
Well, and don't think that God's not working through that time.
Absolutely
Because
not.
this is what it says here. He went through several periods of spiritual conviction in his childhood and youth. So it's not like God wasn't working in that time. He was working hard.
Yeah, and all that will profit for the process of sanctification after conversion. I mean, you think back and you're able to remember the things that you've seen and been through.
Absolutely.
So 1721, he's converted. And what I thought was amazing, he was impacted by 1 Timothy 1:17.
Yes.
All right, so a pastoral epistle. He began ministry a year after that, 1722. So this conversion was, all right, the Lord has converted me. We are headed into ministry. That's the response, man. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
1727, he's married to Sarah, his wife, and he had 11 children.
Yeah, see, there you go.
So we've had 3 forms of 11 children: Flavel's family, Edwards' family, now Edwards' family with Sarah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back.
Yeah, go back wherever.
22 is when he went to New York. This is what I was talking about with you earlier. He was involved in a lot of things that reminded me of today. Wow, that was a lot of crumbles. Let's take a moment.
Time out for a minute.
Oh man. Yeah, get that off of there.
I need a vacuum up here.
Oh my word.
I'm so sorry.
If you all could be in this room. Anyway.
It's a good time. Go ahead. Back to New York.
He started right after he was converted. He went to New York to help with a church split. So basically in New York, there was a church, First Presbyterian Church in New York, where the Scots-Irish people and the English people disagreed on a lot of things. And so the English people were like, forget you, we'll start our own church, which sounds a lot like what goes on today.
It's very applicable to today.
And they asked John to be his, to be their minister there. But in 1723, he came back to Connecticut.
He came on back.
I don't know what that says about that church or anything.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about. Like he wasn't a traveling preacher by any means, but this first couple of years of ministry, he was kind of
finding his place
everywhere. You know, New York, back to Connecticut, and whatnot.
Yeah. It is interesting of note that he was a tutor at Yale as well when he came back to Connecticut, because they had ousted the rector, who was the head of the college, because he decided to revert back to Church of England.
Yeah.
It's always there.
Church of England, man, has caused some issues. Let's just say. And
then in 27, I think that's where you were heading.
Yeah, he took over talking about his marriage.
Oh, well, in 26, he went to help his grandfather who was ailing, his grandfather's church. 27, his grandfather died, and he solely became minister of his grandfather's church. And that's where a bulk of what we talk about with Edwards comes from, is from that church. Yeah.
So Edwards, very similar to Flavel, had a heart for his church, that church that he pastored with his grandfather, no doubt. He had an immense desire to promote godliness in his teaching. That was one constant that I found in studying on Edwards. The congregation struggled immensely to understand godliness, like practiced biblically, you know?
Yeah.
It was, I think, based off of what I was reading, it almost sounded like the congregation was struggling to think, well, this is what we must do for godliness. This is what we must do rather than look to Christ.
Yeah.
And so something I found that was pretty cool in the 1730s, he began preaching on specific sins.
Yes.
Specific sin struggles. So not just sin as a whole, but specific sins, which grew to something amazing.
Well, it speaks to how much he cared for his church. So he wasn't, he was watching his church. He was listening to his church.
He was watching his flock like a shepherd should.
And he was seeing what they were struggling with, and he was addressing it.
Yes.
He saw that at the last year of his grandfather's, his wife's grandfather's life, apparently they had issues in that church. And he wanted to help them out because he loved them.
Yeah, it says a lot. I mean, there's a huge application for us as pastors is, you know, how well do you know your congregation?
Right.
I believe the greater you know your oh my goodness, let's try that again. The greater you know your congregation, the greater you will be able to biblically feed them if you are obedient to where the Lord is instructing and leading you. Right. I mean, I know when I know what's going on in my students' lives, I know if I'm being obedient to being in the Word, as well as praying and lifting them up in those certain situations, God always directs us exactly where we need to be to feed them, because I'm bringing their struggles and their situations before the Lord and going, hey, help me feed them.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Edwards did.
Yeah.
And what was really cool, I added this, and I don't want to get ahead of you if you have to go back to something.
Go for it. I know where you're heading.
Is those very same themes that he hit out, this very same sentence, that is what grew into promoting the revival that is known as the Great Awakening.
Yes. He and other preachers, independent of each other, through the Holy Spirit's power,
one Spirit, people,
brought about
one Spirit,
the Great Awakening.
Which was really, when people hear of Edwards, they think the Great Awakening.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is where sinners in the hands of an angry God. Man, I am so sorry to all of our listeners today. It's just not coming together. But sinners in the hands of an angry God, that's where that was birthed. All kinds of George Whitefield, if you know that name.
Yes.
George Whitefield comes about, John Wesley. Lots of stuff happened during the Great Awakening. We need our own series for that, honestly.
Yeah.
Hey.
So the sinners in the hands of an angry God comes from Deuteronomy 32:35. Let me read that one.
I'm reading Deuteronomy.
Vengeance is mine and recompense for the day when their foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand and their doom comes swiftly.
Okay, Edwards.
So I want to read this quote directly.
Yeah,
this is how his congregation responded to that one sermon. This came from a witness who was there. Before the sermon was done, there was a great moaning and crying out through the whole house. What shall I do to be saved? I'm going to hell. Oh, what shall I do for Christ? Edwards then asked for silence, but the tumult increased until Edwards had to stop preaching.
And you know, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God has been one of the most published and read sermons of all time.
I remember reading it
I read it in high school.
Yeah.
Yep. Because of the literary work of it.
Absolutely. And literature.
I remember reading it and going,
reading about
hold on. Yeah. I just think that's amazing that the obedience to feed his flock and reach his congregation is what birthed into an immense revival within the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So, wow, so many applications we could learn, right? Wow, just be obedient.
Yeah.
It's almost as if obedience is what God calls for, Jesse. Wow.
It's crazy how that is.
You shall be holy as I am. Interesting. But slap to the face, James. Oh, man. So much good stuff. Now, is there anything else you want to add on Edwards before I want to close out with one of my absolute favorite stories of Jonathan Edwards?
Well, yeah, I want to go through a little bit more history.
Yeah, hit some of it, because this story it's a good one to end on.
Yeah.
So you hit it.
So the Great Awakening hit a lot of people. It didn't end up being positive for everybody for very long. Yeah. There was a giant split among people, among ministers, whether the Great Awakening was good or whether it was negative. Yeah. Basically, whether it was actual, like they were actually having spiritual movements, or whether it was very fake. Because you had a man, Charles Chauncey, who denounced the entire awakening, saying that these affections, basically he was saying you can't have the feels, you can't have a spiritual encounter. He was denouncing that, saying religion is more traditional, more formal. It can't be simple, and you can't have affections. To which, like we were talking about before, Jonathan Edwards was like, oh, really? Well, let me write a book about that one in response. And so that's when he wrote a treatise concerning religious affections in 1746, in which he distinguished between true and false religious experiences. Because he was very much a proponent for the Great Awakening. He spent a long time, because I'm sure he got to thinking about that too. Are these people actually having an experience?
Yeah.
Or is it just a show?
Is it just an
emotional?
Which, wow, so much application. It's almost as if you can learn from history.
I know.
It's almost.
Yeah. So then after that, talk about Brainard.
That's my story. Yeah.
Okay.
I can do that.
Do that
right
one
now.
Because it falls at this point.
So you can't talk about Edwards and not talk about Brainard. David Brainard. And if you're wondering, well, who is that? Well, he wasn't really considered a Puritan, but he was in the time of Jonathan Edwards. David Brainard lived only to be 29 years old. And he has an interesting story. And the first time I read about David Brainerd was actually in this book I was referencing earlier. That's why I brought it. But Jonathan Edwards, one of his most famous published works, is the Diary of the Life of David Brainerd, which was the diary that David Brainerd had wrote, and Jonathan Edwards went on to later really just review and publish for him. And I can't remember the names of the men that read it, but famous Puritans read it. I think George Whitefield was one of them that said, "Oh, what a wonder this work is." But I wanted to just talk a little bit about David Brainerd because there's so much application. I'll be quick with it. But David Brainerd, let me start with the beginning of his life. He was born in Connecticut as well. And he was born in the year that John Wesley and Jonathan Edwards were 14, Benjamin Franklin was 12, and George Whitefield was 3. He was in the time of a lot of great names, was when he was born. But he was born in 1718. The Great Awakening was just over the horizon, and this is quoting John Piper, and Brainerd would live through both waves of it in the mid-30s and early 40s of the 18th century. Then he died of tuberculosis in Jonathan Edwards' house at the age of 29 on October 9th, 1747. But Brainerd he grew up in struggle. His family, both his parents died. His oldest brother died. And he was just a young guy that was very smart, pursuing school. And then the Lord dramatically, kind of like Road to Damascus, saved him. John Piper says it was the miracle that happened when he was 21, I think. But long story short, because I could talk about this forever. Long story short, David Brainerd was one who desired to really go into ministry, was going to Yale for that. Then the Lord radically saved him, just like Jonathan Edwards type deal. Then after that, he finally had that enlightenment of being awoken and was truly going into the ministry for the right reason. And in going into the ministry, there was things that were going on at Yale. He spoke up how he disagreed. Something caught under his breath, essentially, that was overheard, and he was kicked out of Yale. He was number 1 of his class when he was kicked out. Jonathan Edwards was on staff at that time, and he wasn't even able to do anything. But he was kicked out of Yale. He was later ordained. They ordained him later on, and he spent his time teaching and tutoring and preaching. But in those years, he was very, very sick, very sick, coughing blood, tuberculosis. And how he ended his life was in writing and teaching, but in doing ministry, he desired to reach the Indians, the Native Americans.
And keep that in mind, because that affected Edwards.
That affected everything, but he desired to reach the Native Americans, but suffered immense illness, suffered immense depression and loneliness. And he ended up dying in the care of one of Jonathan Edwards' daughters at the age of 29 from tuberculosis. But a quote, I read this whole chapter, and I just didn't have time to get all the stuff that I wanted to for this because it's just so much. But a quote that John Piper says that describes the life of David Brainerd that we could learn, and Jonathan Edwards, is, "God is at work for the glory of his name and the good of his church, even when the good intentions of his servants fail, even when it's that failing is owning to sin or carelessness." And he was referring to when David Brainerd spoke up, and he probably shouldn't have because of the way it came across, but that God was still in work for it. And David Brainerd lived a life, but what is important about talking about with Jonathan Edwards is the effect that the desire to reach the Native Americans had on Jonathan Edwards.
Yes, absolutely.
But also the care that Jonathan Edwards had for David Brainerd.
Absolutely.
Many say he loved him as a son.
Absolutely. I think he did.
And so it says a lot about Jonathan Edwards and his heart for people, right? That this young, rebellious, almost like, and being kicked out of school student, he allowed to live in his own home, foster him, love him when he had nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to add to anything on that?
Yeah, I'm just gonna get not to Brainerd, but from there, just to quickly go through the rest of Edwards' life and career. After Brainerd, he was very much embroiled in controversy in his church, in his grandfather's church. I don't think the congregation ever fully saw themselves as being under Edwards. I think they always kind of held themselves to his grandfather's teaching. But the one that got me is he's very much Puritan in the way he thinks, so he takes things very seriously, as well he should. So in 1748, this is one of the things that got him kicked out of his church. A moment of crisis, 1748, he told 2 of his members they lacked the saving grace necessary to partake in the Lord's Supper. Yeah. To which, after they got mad, again, he wrote something called A Humble Inquiry into the Rules and Qualifications for Communion.
My man was wilding out.
Yeah. Basically, he was saying that genuine conversion bears visible fruit, and that is necessary for sacrament privileges. And so he was telling those people, I don't see your fruit, so I don't think you can take communion. And so his church was like,
church
no,
discipline.
Not dealing with that. They said he was too harsh with church discipline, among other things. They cited this example, and they kicked him out. So he gave a farewell sermon in 1750, and he left that church, which is when he also became a missionary to the Native Americans.
Yeah, which, like we said, David Brainard probably had a huge effect on that.
And a sad note, it was during the French and Indian War, and that came to the village he was trying to minister to in 1754, and many of the people he was ministering to were killed. So he spent a lot of that time not having a home church, and that's where a bulk of his work came from as well.
Yeah.
That's where he wrote Freedom of the Will.
Yes, which is one of his most famous, if not the most famous.
Yes.
That's a beautiful book.
Which is not what the title makes it sound like.
It's not at all what you think it is.
And then he also wrote The Great Christian Doctrine of Original Sin. Yep. So then after that, in 1758, he was asked to be the president of another college that we know of as Princeton.
No longer Christian either.
Are any of them?
Honestly, I don't think any of them are. It's kind of depressing when you think about it.
Yeah. So that same year, March 22nd, 1758, while he was trying to write something about the harmony of the Old and the New Testaments and the work of redemption, he died due to complications from a smallpox inoculation. Not from smallpox, but basically from the vaccine.
Yeah, he was trying to get the vaccination, essentially.
Yeah. So,
what a way to go out. Yep. He lived a great life, though. You know, he lived a busy life.
That's what I was thinking. That his life was just so not all over the place, but it was like you said, it was busy.
It says a lot about ministry.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there's any regret in any of these guys in the sense of how they lived their life for the ministry.
Yeah. And with Edwards, what got me, he very intellectual. 13 went to Yale, but he did not let his intellect make himself rise above anybody else.
No, you don't see that at all.
You see that in the way he cared for his congregation to address their specific issues. You see that in the way that he cared for David Brainard.
You don't see arrogance at all. You see heart love.
You see that in the way that when he was kicked out of his church, he just went and became a missionary to the Native Americans.
Gave a farewell sermon, said, "I'm out of here."
Yeah. I mean, there was nothing of him that was pride. I'm sure there was pride struggle, but to me, he was a very humble man, which if you're that smart, I'm sure is extremely hard.
Well, it just says a lot about the heart to reach the layman.
Yes.
You know, it can, something we can learn a lot as ministers that, love to study. Sometimes we let our brains override everything.
Yeah.
But I tell you, these, a lot that I've learned from these guys, these two in particular, is their love for what they do. Same with John Owen and John Bunyan. I mean, an application from all these Puritans and Reformers. And this is just Pastor Larry would agree completely with what I'm about to say, if not amen it 1,000 times. You don't retire from ministry.
Right.
Every one of these guys, when you read in their life, what were they doing? They were serving.
Right.
It says nothing about, they were dwelling in Cancun on an island or, that they were living a luxury life on a golf course.
Yeah.
after they got done doing ministry, because they never got done doing ministry. They did it till the day the Lord called them home.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that is how I want to live my life.
Well, it speaks to where's your joy come from.
That's right. Their joy was found in doing the work of Christ because of Christ in them.
Well, and another thing that I think we've talked about every week is delayed gratification.
Yeah.
They know that their home is not here. Their home is coming.
Dude.
Their glory is coming.
Man.
Glory is coming.
Especially when you think about Richard, John Flavel's dad, Richard Flavel. You think about, you died in prison
after being kicked out of your
plague.
church. Yeah.
You think about how that weighs on somebody. He's like, and then John Bunyan. Well, there's just so much we could go back talking about with it. But again, I think, so we've had a lot of really good application points that we've brought from this series already. How we summarize these two guys, I think, we summarize it with Jonathan Edwards is one of the greatest influences into theology in America. And Flavel is definitely the Robin Hood. But you see from two guys, two different stories, complete opposite sides of the world too, to a degree. You see two guys that had the same heart. And that was to reach people for the sake of the glory of the Lord. And so, man, what we could learn today from that. But man, Jesse, this is a good episode.
Yeah.
This is good stuff, man. We got one more. This is depressing.
I know.
I don't really want it to end. So next week we talk about Martin Lloyd-Jones and we conclude.
Yep.
Man. No, what I was saying earlier, is who knows? We might have to have a special series every once in a while, The Great Awakening or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're nerds. We love it.
We have hit a couple of things in this series that could branch off into other series.
Oh, dude, there's so much that we could. The world of it's endless. Yes. So.
Yeah. So next week
will be our last episode for season 2.
Yes, it will be the last Puritan episode. It will also be the last season 2 episode, and we will take a summer break.
Well, who knows? We might have to do one episode during the summer just to talk about our life or something. Edition. Just one.
Well, yeah, because my third child will be coming.
We need to have a party. Let's sit Zeke right here in front of the camera. He can cry the whole time as long as he's in front of the camera, since his dad won't be. Roast. And I'll make sure to take care of him.
Yeah.
Uncle Vern. So, well, hey, until next time. Next week we talk about Martin Lloyd-Jones if you want to get ahead on your homework. But we will see you next time. Shabbat shalom. Go in peace. Thanks for tuning in.